a brilliant scientist and devoted family man.
Eugene was a beautiful person.
He definitely wanted to change the world for the better.
Found viciously beaten to death.
32 lacerations to the face and body.
He had suffered a crushed trachea.
Police uncover a trail of evidence and search for a brutal killer.
The volume of blood told the story of how far the struggle went.
There were numerous items of evidence seized.
Several suspects emerge.
We did receive tips that it was a professional hit.
He was doing work that might have threatened someone enough that they murdered him.
I knew him to be someone who would maybe not want to cross.
Until the case takes a jaw-dropping turn.
And then a bombshell was dropped.
We thought that we were really onto something, and that kind of fell apart.
And the truth is revealed.
You're telling a family that you've arrested the right people.
We were back to square one.
She wasn't telling us all this stuff out of the goodness of her heart.
It just didn't sound like it could be possible.
Norwich is a small city in eastern Connecticut, known as the Rose of New England.
The city of Norwich is an old mill town. It's not as affluent as the rest of Connecticut. There's poverty here. You know, there's hard luck here. But overall, it's a good city. It's one of those places that doesn't change much.
But on the night of May 14th, 2004, Norwich was shaken to its core by a horrible crime.
911. I was coming here to look at an apartment and there's someone laying on the ground. He's not moving and he looks like he's dead.
Police and paramedics race to the scene.
They found a white male in his 50s. There was a lot of blood. It was a horrific scene. And the paramedic indicated that the unresponsive person was deceased. Upon arrival at the scene, we could tell that there was a vicious beating with numerous strikes to the face with some unknown object.
He had suffered quite a lot of injuries to his face and neck. And there was a pattern on his clothing. It looked like it may have been shoe impressions.
There may have been a case of someone either stepping or stomping upon the victim.
The victim's shoes were missing, a wallet, and some other items were missing that he would have normally had.
The missing items suggest a robbery. But what explains the viciousness of the attack?
The volume of blood told the story of how far the struggle went from the side of the house to a car parked in the driveway. The violent struggle had moved throughout the backyard to the location where the body was found. There's always a possibility that it was a random crime, but the manner of death did raise our suspicions about it being possibly more of a personal nature.
The forensic team gets to work.
They collected the blood, hair, fiber, evidence, anything that they could find at the scene.
But this crime scene poses unique challenges for investigators.
The property itself appeared to have been in the process of being cleaned up.
There was a lot of debris. There was broken glass, and there was metal, there was, bike parts.
It was difficult to see if any of that material had anything to do with the crime scene. We did not determine the murder weapon at the scene.
There were numerous items of evidence seized.
We saw a hose in the backyard that had blood on it. A keychain was found at the scene and a brick with some apparent blood residue. The situation with the house told us that the victim was not residing in the house.
Detectives turned to the 911 caller for a statement.
She said she had seen a for rent sign and she called the number.
The woman who answered said that her husband, the owner, was at the house.
She says, "Oh yeah, my husband's down there working on the property. We should go talk to him."
So she went to the property and discovered the body in the driveway. She dialed 911 at approximately 10:55 p.m.
Police now believe the victim is the owner of the rental property, New Hampshire resident Eugene Maloff.
I conveyed that information to the New Hampshire police, and they were able to notify Joanne Maloff that we had discovered someone that appeared to be her husband.
I received a call at 2 o'clock in the morning from Joanne. And she said, Eugene's been murdered. And it just didn't sound like it could be possible, like it was a bad dream. It just rocked my world.
"56-year-old Eugene Maloff was born and raised in Norwich.
Eugene and I were very close, all through grade school, high school. We just loved each other's company. He was just a down-to-earth, sensitive, nice guy.
Okay, come on. Let's do our standard dance.
Eugene and his wife Joanne were married young and soon after started a family.
Joanne was made for Eugene. They were both very outgoing and had a lot of warmth. Eugene was always very loving to the kids, just very gregarious and sweet. We knew from a very, very young age that he was a genius.
He got his education from Harvard and then MIT, and he had a doctorate in environmental engineering.
He wrote books about outer space and nuclear energy. There aren't many people like him who can both understand the science and communicate the science.
After completing his PhD, Eugene embraced cold fusion, a controversial theory about limitless energy.
Gene got deeply involved in cold fusion, which was contrary to a lot of conventional thought at the time. If cold fusion realizes its potential, you would have unlimited alternative energy. Gene definitely wanted to change the world for the better.
Gene was trying to follow his dream and go on the path less chosen, and he was working on new ways that we could stop global warming and have a better world.
All right, there we are. But that's our little house.
Eugene always told his parents that he wanted them to keep the house in Norwich. He was sentimental and he just loved those old memories.
Now, the house that held Eugene's fondest memories had become the scene of his family's worst nightmare.
That was the house that he grew up in, and although he moved to New Hampshire, he had kept the family property and had rented it out for years.
Detectives call Eugene's wife, Joanne, and question her about her husband's last known movements.
She said on this particular day, he had come down to clean up the property, making sure that it was all suitable for renters. And he had a dumpster delivered. Joanne Maloff had spoken to her husband earlier that afternoon, and in fact, she had expected he would be home in New Hampshire by 9 o'clock or so that evening.
Police learned that Eugene had driven his minivan to Norwich that day.
She described the van, and it had some unique markings on it, and also had New Hampshire plates. Mrs. Maloff said the van should have been on the property.
But there was no van in the driveway.
The first thing you're thinking of is that the killer had taken off with Mr. Maloff's van.
He's a family man murdered and brutally beaten. I think that shocks the conscience of any neighborhood.
We felt that whoever was driving that van was complicit with the homicide of Dr. Maloff.
Coming up, investigators uncover conflicting evidence.
They had been involved in a theft of a motor vehicle and some kind of violent struggle.
Blood was sent to the laboratory, but there was no match. It wasn't logical.
and disturbing secrets.
I realized that there were people out there that weren't happy with Jean.
Whose blood is that and where did it come from?
He wanted to commit suicide and was shaking and hyperventilating.
Some of the things regarding her whereabouts on the night of the murder hadn't added up.
I had to accept it, but it was a terrible thing.
Nuclear scientist Eugene Maloff has been found violently beaten to death at the rental property he owns. And police suspect the killer fled in his van.
We put out a bolo, be on the lookout to all the local police departments for the van.
While detectives wait for news on the van, they interview neighbors.
The purpose of the neighborhood canvass to try and figure out when was the last time Mr. Maloff was seen alive.
We spoke to a neighborhood friend of Dr. Maloff. He indicated that he had seen him mowing the lawn earlier that day, and nothing was suspicious at the time. He did indicate that at about 8:30 p.m. that evening, the van was not there, which gave us a time frame to start working with.
Dr. Maloff had been mowing the lawn. Everything had grass cuttings covering it, from abandoned bicycles and debris on the ground, but there wasn't a stitch of grass on these keys. So we believe that those keys were dropped after Dr. Maloff had mowed the lawn, which would have been sometime around the time of the homicide.
Detectives hope neighbors can help them identify the owner of the keys. But then, police receive an urgent call from a local casino.
We were notified that Dr. Maloff's van had been located in the employee parking lot of the Foxwoods Casino, which was approximately 7 miles away from the crime scene. When we arrived, the tailpipe was cold as if it had been there for several hours. The van was towed back to the City of Norwich Public Works Garage so that the State Police Major Crime Unit could process the van.
They searched the van for hairs, fibers, and anything that looked like blood.
They didn't obtain any fingerprints from the door handles or steering wheel, which indicated to us that the driver quite possibly was wearing gloves.
Investigators hope security footage will help them identify the driver of Eugene's van.
It was a hazy, foggy evening, and we weren't able to gather much evidence at all from the cameras at the Foxwoods Casino.
With the killer still at large, police turn their attention to Eugene's wife, Joanne, in New Hampshire.
Probably a 3-hour drive from New Hampshire to the crime scene. The Maloff family, they had alibis, and they were not suspects at this time. Joanne Maloff couldn't provide anybody's name that would have any intention of hurting her husband.
Police asked Joanne for information about recent tenants at Eugene's rental property in Norwich.
We needed to obtain the identity of all individuals that lived in the house. They were definitely persons of interest. Joanne Maloff told us that Jean had evicted Pat and Roy Anderson approximately 2 weeks prior to the murder.
Jean's tenants stopped paying the rent, and Eugene eventually had to look into how to get them out, because I think they were there for a good 6 months before they actually left. Gene didn't want to be cruel to people, and I think he really gave them a lot of leeway, but enough is enough.
For detectives, it's the first break in the investigation.
Pat and Roy Anderson had been living at Mr. Maloff's property for a long period of time, up till the eviction.
My immediate questions were, where are the people that were evicted? How do we locate the Andersons?
Luckily, a tip from a neighbor leads police to the Andersons' son, Chad Schaefer, who lives nearby with his girlfriend, Candace Foster.
One of the investigators went to their apartment to get information about Chad's mom and dad, Pat and Roy.
The purpose of his interview was to determine whether or not the Andersons had seen Gene Maloff on the property, if they'd seen him, when they had last seen him,
Chad claims that his parents had not seen Eugene since he served them the eviction notice.
Chad Schaefer said there were no hard feelings between the Andersons and Gene Maloff.
Police asked Chad for his whereabouts on the night of the murder.
Chad and Candace indicated that they were both home with their newborn on the night in question, and that was their alibi.
Chad cooperates with police and provides them with his parents' new address.
I subsequently went out to Pat and Roy Anderson's new rental out in Montville, Connecticut, and interviewed them about Gene's death. Pat Anderson, she corroborated Chad Schaefer's assessment that when they were evicted, they moved on and there was no feelings of animosity between themselves and Gene Maloff.
Detectives still want to know where the Andersons were at the time of the murder.
Patricia Anderson worked in a nursing home. Ian said she was at home after working previously during the day.
Police ask Roy point blank if he has an alibi around the time that Eugene was murdered.
He indicated that he had worked from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. in the morning out at the Foxwoods Casino. And Dr. Maloff's van had been located in the employee parking lot of the Foxwoods Casino.
That was very suspicious to the investigator. From the crime scene to the Foxwoods Casino parking lot, it's not far, a 15-minute drive. And then you're thinking maybe this eviction thing was a personal thing. And you have as investigators to figure out who did it so that person can be held accountable.
Police investigating the murder of cold fusion scientist Eugene Maloff now have their first real suspect. His recently evicted tenant, Roy Anderson, works at the same casino where Eugene's stolen van was found on the night of the murder.
Roy reported that there was no animosity about the eviction. There was no problem between Eugene and Roy. But Dr. Maloff's van had been found at the Foxwoods lot.
Angered by the eviction, had Roy killed Eugene in revenge?
We got a list of names of employees that night, and we verified that Roy Anderson was in fact working from 5 p.m. until 1 a.m., and that provided him with a pretty solid alibi that he was not within the city of Norwich at all. Pat and Roy Anderson were both individuals of interest, but they had alibis.
Police want to know if anyone else was living in their house at the time of the eviction.
One of the things that we learned in talking to Pat and Roy, they would bring other people in to help pay for rooms.
We needed to obtain the location of all individuals that lived in the house.
It turns out one of the Andersons' subletters is well known to police.
Lenny Campbell was a friend of Roy's, and they allowed Lenny to stay in the basement of the house.
I personally had run into him a few times during the course of my patrol duties. I knew him to be an individual that someone would maybe not want to cross. The Andersons, when they were evicted, Lenny moved out with them to their new place.
Police want to speak to Lenny, but the Andersons say he recently packed up and left without an explanation.
He moved out shortly after Eugene's murder, and investigators thought it was suspicious.
When police try to track Lenny down, they find he's moved out of state.
Lenny Campbell was working on a farm up in Massachusetts. Lenny denied ever even having contact with Eugene Maloff.
Lenny isn't talking, and there's no evidence connecting him to the crime scene.
At this point in the investigation, we really need some solid forensic evidence that somebody was complicit in the murder of Eugene Maloff.
Police receive the autopsy report, and it sheds more light on how Eugene was killed.
The medical examiner's office indicated approximately 32 lacerations to the face and body.
And he had suffered a crushed trachea.
what possibly could have sparked such a vicious assault?
We did receive tips throughout the course of the investigation saying that it was a professional hit.
Was Eugene assassinated for his research into alternative energy?
I thought that perhaps because cold fusion was so controversial, that maybe it was some kind of planned setup.
I do believe there's always a danger to somebody that's going to rock the boat. I realized that Gene's passion for countering big oil meant that there were plenty of people out there that weren't happy with Gene.
It occurred to me that, he was doing work that might have threatened someone enough that it would have murdered him.
We delved into it, and based on the crime scene and the circumstances in which he was killed, I don't think a professional hitman would go about his business in that manner. It just didn't add up. It wasn't logical.
Police are running out of leads, but then a witness comes forward with a bizarre account from the night of the murder.
We came in contact with a shuttle driver for a nearby hotel sometime between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. on the night of the murder. He had pulled up to a traffic light and saw a van similar to the doctor's van, and he noticed the operator of the van, a white male, was wearing socks on his hands.
Obviously, you start to think, well, if the person's wearing socks on their hands, they don't want to transfer any evidence onto a steering wheel.
Whoever was driving that van with hands covered with socks was possibly complicit with the homicide. Gene Maloff's van had been moved into a fenced-in compound, and we examined it again for anything that we may have missed or the state police may have missed, and we seized a few items to include a plastic bag.
Police submit the bag to the state forensic lab for analysis.
And as a result of that, a fingerprint came back. It was the first piece of evidence that would place somebody in that van, possibly on the night of the murder.
The print is run through the police database.
The fingerprint belonged to a local individual from the Norwich area.
When we ran this person's record, they had a record of burglaries.
He was the type of guy that wouldn't have any problems breaking into your car. Maybe Eugene Maloff got killed for it.
Police have a fresh lead in the murder of Eugene Maloff. A fingerprint on a plastic bag found in the scientist's stolen van is matched to a local car burglar.
The results of that examination indicated that a print on the bag belonged to a Nicholas Gardner.
Police track the suspect down and bring him in for questioning.
He was very nonchalant about the fact that he had broken into the van, but when it was brought to his attention that that vehicle was used following a homicide, his demeanor shifted dramatically, and he became very nervous at that point.
When police grill him further, he makes a startling admission.
He said that he broke into a police impound lot.
He explained that he had broken into the impound lot and was burglarizing the cars. And that would explain how his fingerprints had been found in Mr. Maloff's van.
Police confirm his story when his prints are found on other vehicles in the lot.
Nicholas was definitely wrong place, wrong time, and had no clue that the van that he was entering was involved in the homicide of Gene Maloff.
Nicholas is charged with the burglaries, but it's a dead end in the search for Eugene's killer. Then, police get a call that reignites the case.
We received a phone call from the New Britain Police Department, 40 minutes away from the city of Norwich. A New Britain police officer had come in contact with two subjects. They were in a parking lot. They were asleep in the vehicle. It was a stolen vehicle. It had been reported stolen the same night of Dr. Maloff's murder.
When the officer looked inside the car, he made an alarming discovery.
They had been found with blood inside their vehicle. And so obviously the first inclination is, whose blood is that and where did it come from?
The men are arrested and taken to the station.
When they were taken into custody, they were identified as Joseph Riley and Gary McAvoy. Officers at the scene observed that Riley and McAvoy had evidence of some kind of violent struggle.
Is it possible these two men were involved in Eugene's murder?
We wanted to either rule them into our homicide scene or rule them out.
So investigators from Norwich went up and spoke with Riley and McAvoy at the lockup in New Britain.
Police interview Riley and McAvoy in separate rooms. They press Riley about the bloodstains in the car and scratches on his arms and legs.
Joe Riley told the detectives that he and McAvoy ended up in an altercation with one another.
They both said that they got into a fight in the car, and that's how they had the blood in the car.
Investigators question the pair about Eugene's homicide.
During Riley's interview, he made some statements that really caught our attention. He asked, did the old man get the kicked out of him? But the manner of death of Gene Maloff had not been relayed to Riley at that time.
How did Riley seem to know details about how Eugene was killed? McAvoy's response to questioning raises more red flags.
When the officer advised him that he was being investigated for a potential homicide, Gary McAvoy became very distraught. He indicated that he wanted to commit suicide and at one point curled up in a fetal position on the floor and was shaking and hyperventilating.
The statements provided by Riley and McAvoy were suspicious to the investigators.
Police bring in the hotel shuttle driver who claimed he saw someone driving Eugene's van on the night of the murder.
He told us that the operator of the van was a white male.
A photo array was offered to the witness, and he pointed out to Joseph Riley as the driver of the minivan that he saw that night.
Police now have a witness placing one of their suspects inside Eugene Maloff's van on the night he was murdered.
Riley and McAvoy had been involved in a theft of a motor vehicle and a burglary, and they did have evidence of violent struggle, and the witness picks Riley out of a photo lineup.
Police still lack physical evidence, so they obtain the men's DNA to compare to samples collected from the crime scene and the van.
Evidence was sent up to the Connecticut State Police Forensic Laboratory.
When results come back, it's a major break.
We received a phone call from the forensic lab saying that the hair in Mr. Maloff's van was a match to Mr. McAvoy. Okay, well, that's a blockbuster.
We had solid forensic evidence, and we're going to move forward with the warrant.
Riley and McAvoy are charged with Eugene's murder.
I was happy for the family that maybe they'd get some closure on this case.
But then, investigators receive a disturbing call.
We thought we were on strong footing based on the solid forensic evidence from the van, and the case was going to move forward. And then a bombshell was dropped.
Joseph Riley and Gary McAvoy are charged for the murder of Eugene Maloff after one of McAvoy's hairs is matched to a hair found in Eugene's van. But then, police receive news that rocks the case.
Bombshell was dropped by the state forensic lab. The lab reached out to us and said there was a mistake and that McAvoy's hair was not at the crime scene and were not in the van.
There was a clerical error at the laboratory.
And somewhere at the lab there was confusion over the item numbers. So the hair fiber they tested, they thought came from the van, in fact came from the hair of the suspects up in prison. And as a result, the state of Connecticut decided they were not going to pursue homicide charges against Riley or McAvoy.
We thought that we were really onto something, and that kind of fell apart.
At this point, we were back to square one.
You're telling a family who lost a loved one to violent crime that you've arrested the right people. And that falls apart, and then we say to the Maloff family, I'm sorry, we couldn't do better.
I had to accept it, but it was a terrible thing. I would cry on the way to work, and I think when you go through a tragedy, your world becomes very small. Joanne was very upset, and I saw her break down once when we were going someplace. I was following her, and she lost her way. She just was devastated at that point.
When the investigation went on so long, I had a feeling it was just one of those random events, and we would never learn anything more of it. I think I pretty much accepted that.
The case goes cold. Then, 4 years after the murder of Eugene Maloff, the investigation is rebooted. Determined to solve the crime, Norwich PD assigned new resources to the case.
They put a task force together, and I was assigned to work with the state's attorney's office, along with Detective Terry McFadden.
Detective Curtis and I picked up on the case and basically started from day one.
Cold cases are just cases that take longer to solve than others. It was a fresh start, and it let us get to work on finding out who the real killers were.
We had met with the Maloff family and just told them that we were trying to get justice for Eugene, and we were able to secure a reward for information about Mr. Maloff's homicide, and that's not typically seen in every homicide.
The reward is advertised on a large billboard near the interstate.
We worked with the family, and we came up with the best design possible and put a billboard up where we thought that the most people would see Eugene's face and see our message to the public saying we needed help with this investigation.
After just a few weeks, the billboard starts to bring results.
The day I won't forget in this case is when we had a witness come into the police department and explain to me that they had direct information related to the death of Eugene Maloff.
The witness claims to know Candace Foster and Chad Schaefer. Chad is the son of the Andersons, the tenants Eugene evicted.
Jill Sebastian was friends with Candace Foster and Chad Schaefer, and had actually lived with them around that time of Mr. Maloff's murder. She began to tell us about how when they would see reports about Mr. Maloff's murder on the TV, Chad would start getting kind of antsy. And Candace had mentioned to Jill about Chad coming home with bloody clothing around the time of Mr. Maloff's murder.
Investigators are stunned by Jill's statement, but police have no evidence connecting Chad Schaefer to the crime scene.
Early in the investigation, an investigator went to Chad and Candace. They said that on the night of the murder, they had stayed home and there was no evidence to support any connection to Eugene's death.
Police are eager to corroborate Jill's story. Her boyfriend, Keyshawn, agrees to give a statement.
Keyshawn told us that Chad Schaefer confessed to Keyshawn that he had killed Eugene Maloff.
Obviously, it's a significant development in the case. We started to look at Candace Foster and Chad more closely.
Police learned that in the years after the murder, Chad and Candace had separated. They focused their attention on Candace.
The number one goal for us was to get information from her regarding Chad, being a participant in the murder of Dr. Eugene Maloff.
Police urge Candace to tell them everything she knows.
This is the father of her children that she's now going to be telling us about that participated in a homicide. Candace and Chad had a tumultuous relationship, and she related to us that her biggest fear for her and her children was Chad.
Detectives asked Candace about a piece of physical evidence that could tie Chad to the crime scene.
Candace told us that those keys had been hanging inside the loft at the apartment where Candace and Chad lived. And we happened to find a key ring, similar, at the crime scene.
The information is damning, but investigators suspect that Candace is hiding something.
Some of the things that Candace had said regarding Chad or regarding her whereabouts on the night of the murder hadn't added up. We had to let Candace know that she would have to come clean and explain to us everything she knew about the murder.
When we interviewed her, a little bit of information would come out, and then a little bit more information would come out. And then it reached a point where Candace did tell us someone other than Chad was involved in Mr. Maloff's murder.
Detectives believe Eugene Maloff was killed by his former tenant's son, Chad Schaefer. But Chad's ex-girlfriend, Candace, claims Chad wasn't the only one involved in the brutal murder.
Candace told us that Moselle Brown, he had been at the scene with Chad at the time of Mr. Maloff's murder. Moselle Brown was the cousin of Chad Schaefer.
Chad had been hanging around with Moselle a little bit more often around this time. Moselle Brown had a violent criminal past. We knew of him. We were cautious of him.
Investigators press Candace for more details about events leading up to Eugene's murder. She says it all started when a relative saw Eugene cleaning out the rental unit the Andersons had been evicted from.
Candace told us that all day long, Chad had been getting phone calls from his mom, Patricia Anderson, saying that the landlord was throwing all their things in the garbage. Patricia was really upset and starts putting out pressure on Chad. I told you, you were supposed to get that stuff out of there. You were supposed to have that house cleaned out. I want my belongings. And Chad had gotten picked up by Moselle Brown.
He told Moselle that Mr. Maloff was throwing stuff out that belonged to Chad's parents. They got upset.
And they go over there and they say, listen, we're not going to take it from this guy. And Mr. Maloff says, no, get out of here. I gave you plenty of time to get your stuff out of here, leave. And someone throws a punch. They hit him once, and now once they hit him, these guys don't stop. They just start beating him. And they leave him for dead.
Following the vicious assault, the pair returned to Chad and Candace's apartment.
Candace told us that they returned. And Chad was upset, and Chad had blood on his clothing. And Chad explained to Candace that they had beaten the landlord.
But Candace's account doesn't explain how Eugene's van ended up in the casino parking lot.
Candace wasn't telling us all this stuff out of the goodness of her heart. She was doing this to minimize her involvement and minimize her punishment.
When investigators confront her about her deception, she finally cracks.
From what Candace was telling us, it looked like three of them were involved. Chad Schaefer, Moselle Brown, and Candace Foster.
Candace says she returned to the rental property with Chad and Moselle to cover up their crime.
Candace said they walked down the path to the garage to where they saw Eugene Maloff laying on the ground, and that he was still alive and still breathing, but he was severely beaten. And they realized they gotta kill him.
Candace Foster was a bit reluctant to do that, at which point they threatened her.
Chad and Moselle said if she didn't participate, that she'd be next.
It was a vicious beating with numerous strikes to the face with some unknown object.
And at that point, Eugene's still alive. And that's when Moselle steps on his throat until he stops breathing.
After killing Eugene, Chad, Moselle, and Candace staged the scene to throw police off their trail.
They wanted to make this look like it was a robbery, and part of that was that Candace drove the van and dropped it off in the casino parking lot.
With Candace's story, investigators believe they have enough evidence to charge Chad and Moselle with murder. They arrest Chad Schaefer first.
When the news came through that they actually had an arrest, it was a shock to find out that Gene was killed by a son of a disgruntled tenant. It just seemed unfair.
When investigators track down Moselle Brown, they find out he's serving time in Ohio for another crime.
We extradited him back to Connecticut to face charges for the killing of Eugene Maloff. I believe the X factor was Moselle. He was the violent ringleader, and I believe Chad Schaefer and Candace Foster would not have killed Eugene Maloff in the absence of Moselle.
The three accused are tried separately.
Moselle received more than 50 years in prison. At Chad's trial, he was defiant and ultimately took a plea deal and took the offer that the state put on the table.
Chad Schaefer agrees to plead guilty to first-degree manslaughter.
Chad Schaefer received a 25-year sentence, and he would have to serve 17 and a half years.
Candace Foster is the last to face justice.
There's no way that we could have had as strong a case that we did against Moselle and Chad without Candace. And Candace, with her attorney, made an arrangement with the state's attorney's office for her to receive the sentence that she got.
Candace eventually was charged with hindering prosecution and tampering with evidence.
She served 3 years in jail and then several years of probation.
The verdicts bring closure, but nothing can replace what Gene's loved ones have lost.
I'm not a good judge as to whether justice was served, but the bottom line was that we couldn't bring back that special, wonderful man.
I think Gene would like to be remembered as somebody that advanced the deeper knowledge of the universe.
I think Gene did make a difference in the world. I think he could have made a much bigger difference had he been around longer.
I just miss Gene, and I really relish all the memories I have of all the happy times. We all loved him so much. The world has lost a great human being, a great mind, and a beautiful person.
In California, detectives investigated a gruesome murder. The suspect fled and was eventually caught in Arizona. His confinement didn't last long. He escaped and disappeared into the Grand Canyon, robbing and kidnapping tourists as he went. To stop the elusive killer, FBI agents and local officers joined forces on a dangerous manhunt.
A killer was on the loose in one of America's most popular tourist destinations. Armed and desperate, he evaded law enforcement at every turn. As the 4th of July weekend quickly approached, thousands of people became potential targets. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents would use any means necessary to track a killer before he could strike again.
In the early morning hours of September 20th, 1990, a fisherman cast a line into the Burns Cut River near Stockton, California. He felt a tug and reeled in something heavy. It was a large plastic bag. Inside, he found a human leg. The fisherman called the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office.
Find anything else out there?
Deputies responded to the scene immediately. They confirmed the report of human remains and could find no clue as to the victim's identity. The deputies called in Homicide Detective Sergeant Armando Mayoya, who would run the investigation.
The search of the river for any other items of evidence and body parts continued through the night and then into the next morning. We were able to get a boat unit out to the river along with a search of the banks by detectives.
By first light, the deputies were dragging the river. While they checked the deeper water, detectives walked the riverbank. It wasn't long before they discovered another plastic bag. Inside were 2 arms. The wrists were bound together with masking tape.
Hold it, hold it.
Nearby, the boat unit deputies soon pulled up another object. It was a human torso wrapped in a sheet. Later, they would find a right leg, the victim's head, and some clothing, all in separate plastic bags.
74.
After several hours of searching, investigators had recovered an entire male body. They didn't know who the man was.
It was a pretty brutal murder case, and for someone to take the time to dismember a person and to transport that person in different bags and dispose of the body without caring, it's very callous and cold.
At the morgue, a coroner examined the remains. He determined that the victim had been dismembered with a serrated knife. It would take more time to determine the actual cause of death, or if the man was alive when he was dismembered. Detectives searched the clothing and found a wallet containing a California driver's license. It belonged to 40-year-old Sam Lee McCullough of Stockton. Police records showed McCullough had a minor arrest record. A fingerprint check confirmed his identity. After informing McCullough's family of his death, detectives got permission to check his house for evidence.
Once the victim was identified and we had a name and a location where he lived, we responded to the victim's address. He lived in the 5200 block of East Mariposa Road in South Stockton.
They arranged to meet Sam McCullough's girlfriend at his home.
Someone is missing?
She had reported McCullough missing earlier that day. Since he hadn't called her in several days, she checked McCullough's house and saw that the place was in disarray. Many items were missing, including his white Jeep Cherokee. Also missing were 2 shotguns, a revolver, and a 9mm semi-automatic pistol.
Thank you.
Detectives and deputies examined McCullough's house. Noting footprints on the floor, they conducted an electrostatic search to reveal details of the prints, which appeared to be made by boots. Investigators also recovered latent fingerprints, but none were foreign to the house. If the murder occurred in the house, the killer had removed any obvious evidence.
A homicide of this nature, you would expect to find blood just all over the place, stains. The person that was involved in this case took a lot of time to clean and hide his tracks in this case.
In the bathroom, a deputy made an important discovery.
We were just about ready to leave when we ran a flashlight through the tub area, and we saw a reflection come from the drain area.
It looked like the sparkle from a sequin. The investigators knew it was collagen, a substance in bones that has a particularly reflective quality.
Looking a little deeper into the drain, we found blood, tissue, and bone, and a large amount of hair. And based on that, there was a great probability at that point that the victim had been dismembered in the bathtub of the residence.
Keep going over here. Stay closer.
Laboratory tests would later match the blood and hair to Sam McCullough. Eventually, the coroner determined McCullough had been dead before he was dismembered. Cause of death was a gunshot wound to the forehead.
What caliber do you think it is, Doctor?
Powder burns indicated he had been shot at point-blank range. The coroner removed the bullet fragments and sent them to the state ballistics lab. Examiners there studied the size, weight, and composition of the fragments, determining that the murder weapon was a .22 caliber rifle. Comparing the fragments to slugs test-fired from sample weapons can identify specific models. California Department of Justice examiners believe the weapon used was probably a Western Field brand rifle. Detectives found documents listing the serial numbers of McCullough's Jeep and his guns. They entered the numbers into the National Crime Information Center. The NCIC is a nationwide database used by law enforcement agencies to track criminals, missing persons, and stolen property. If the items turned up anywhere, San Joaquin detectives would be notified. Within days, a Stockton police officer discovered the victim's Jeep abandoned several miles from McCullough's house. Yet an examination yielded no additional clues. Investigators still had no leads on the killer. They canvassed McCullough's neighborhood, hoping to find a witness. No one reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. But one neighbor recalled that McCullough had been robbed 2 years earlier. Police records confirmed the story.
In doing a name search, we uncovered a report listing the suspect as being a Stephen Horning. In that case, Stephen had apparently, according to the victim, robbed the victim at gunpoint.
It was the first solid lead. Stephen Horning wasn't at his last known address, so detectives tracked down his older brother, who was a campus police officer at a nearby college. He told detectives that Stephen was one of 5 brothers and was especially close to one brother, Danny Ray Horning. Stephen and Danny spent a lot of time together. They often hunted and fished along the Burns Cut River, the same river where McCullough's body had been dumped. He told the detectives about one particular hunting trip Stephen and Danny had taken.
They had shot a deer, brought it home, and butchered the deer in the bathtub of the residence. And that was significant to us, as the victim had been dismembered in the same way.
Okay.
The eldest Horning brother added another detail familiar to detectives. After butchering the deer, Danny had placed the animal's limbs in black plastic garbage bags. Detectives thought the story had an eerie resemblance to the homicide of Sam McCullough. They asked the brother to identify some clothing found in a bag containing body parts in the Burns Cut River. He said that the black shorts and t-shirt looked like those his brother Danny often wore. Police noted that no one in the Horning family had seen Stephen or Danny since September 19th, the day Sam McCullough was probably killed.
The investigation progressed to the point where there was enough probable cause to present the case to a judge, and a search warrant was issued for Stephen and Danny, along with an arrest warrant.
On November 20th, 1990, 2 months after the murder, San Joaquin Sheriff's officers returned to the brothers' trailer located behind their parents' house. No one was inside, so detectives searched the surrounding area. Behind the trailer, they found important evidence. A cut stock and a sawed-off barrel from a rifle. Lab examiners had reported that the weapon used to kill McCullough was probably a Western Field brand .22 caliber rifle.
The barrel found in the field next to the suspect's house was a Western Field .22 caliber barrel.
The next day, deputies went back to the trailer. One of the brothers, Stephen Horning, was there. He was arrested and charged with murder. The second suspect, Stephen's brother, Danny Ray Horning, was nowhere to be found.
Sit down here, watch your name.
At the San Joaquin, California County Jail in December of 1990, detectives held one suspect in the murder and dismemberment of Sam McCullough. Stephen Horning had been arrested after a month-long investigation, but detectives needed more evidence to hold him. His brother, Danny Ray Horning, was also wanted but had fled the area. Stephen swore he had nothing to do with the murder and said he didn't know where Danny was. Since Stephen wouldn't help them locate Danny, the investigators turned to the Horning's father for answers. Mr. Horning offered valuable information regarding the possible murder weapon to Detective Sergeant Armando Mayoya.
After speaking with the suspect Danny's father, I learned that Danny had been seen with a sawed-off .22 rifle.
Their father said Danny and Stephen had been behind the trailer when Danny shot a dog with the .22. Then Stephen fired at it with a crossbow. Mr. Horning believed his sons had buried the dog in the field behind the trailer. investigators searched the Horning's yard. They noticed one area seemed to be covered with freshly dug earth and began to excavate.
The dog was found, and a search of the dog by another detective found a bullet in the brain.
The bullet was processed at the state ballistics lab. Examiners determined that the dog was killed with a Western Field .22 caliber rifle. The same model had been used to murder Sam McCullough. The technician compared the bullet from the dog to the one that had killed McCullough. The tests indicated it was likely that both bullets were fired from the same weapon. Detectives returned to the county jail and confronted Stephen Horning. They described the damaging ballistics evidence, explaining that the bullet from the dog was consistent with the bullet that killed Sam McCullough, and that his brother Danny had been seen with a Western Field .22. Realizing the case against them was strong, Stephen decided to cooperate. He claimed Danny had been in on the first robbery of McCullough 2 years earlier. Danny had vowed to kill McCullough for pressing charges. But then he went to prison for child molestation. When he got out a few months before McCullough's death, Danny had mentioned going back to rob McCullough again. Since no physical evidence implicated Stephen in Sam McCullough's death, investigators dropped the murder charge against him. They needed to find his brother, but Danny Ray Horning had disappeared. For 6 months, Detective Sergeant Armando Mayoya worked the case but found no new leads. Then, on March 22, 1991, he was contacted by authorities in Winslow, Arizona about Horning.
Well, I received a phone call from Winslow Police Department, and they informed me that he had been arrested in a bank robbery.
That day, Horning had walked into the Valley National Bank in Winslow, more than 800 miles east of Stockton, California. He trained his 9mm pistol on the bank manager while a teller filled a bag with $25,000. When she was in the other room, the teller had tripped a silent alarm. A block away at the Winslow Police Department, Detective Elmer Hassey took the call.
Under the concealment of the unmarked car, I had plenty of cover. Positioned myself to where I could try to see what was going on in the bank.
He couldn't see from the vehicle, so he went for a closer look. When the detective checked through the window, he saw a single gunman backing toward the door with a hostage.
It came through the door. I stuck the gun up to his rib cage and pulled him towards the wall and took the bank bag out of his hand.
The suspect was carrying a 9mm pistol. Detective Hassey determined the suspect's name was Danny Ray Horning. An NCIC check revealed the murder warrant in California. Hassey described the weapon recovered to Detective Mayoya.
They informed me that they had in their possession a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. They gave me the serial number, and I confirmed that number as being the weapon that was taken from the victim McCullough's residence.
In Arizona, Horning was convicted of armed robbery, kidnapping, and assault. At trial, he dared a judge to give him the stiffest sentence possible, vowing to escape within a year. The judge accepted the challenge and gave Horning 4 life sentences. California authorities decided not to extradite Horning, who would serve his time at the Arizona State Prison in Florence. On May 12, 1992, prison officers doing the 4 o'clock head count found that prisoner number 85897 was not in his cell. The prison was locked down and thoroughly searched. But Danny Ray Horning was nowhere to be found. The convicted felon and suspected killer was on the run. On May 12, 1992, outside the Arizona State Prison in Florence, a massive manhunt began for escapee Danny Ray Horning, who had been serving 4 life sentences. Horning was also a suspect in a gruesome dismemberment in California. Arizona Department of Corrections fugitive investigator Doug Schuster helped organize the search.
We have a lot of expert trackers, dogs, vehicles, equipment. The plan was to track him and apprehend him. We were planning to sight him, pick up a trail, follow him with dogs, horses, men, and locate him.
Law enforcement teams from local, state, and federal agencies responded outside the prison. But Horning had disappeared from the immediate area. While the teams widened their circle, Schuster returned to the prison to try to figure out how the accused killer managed to escape. Prison officials contacted the FBI to assist in the investigation. Authorities first checked Horning's records. The convicted felon had been housed in Central Unit, the prison's most secure area. There was no evidence that he had tunneled out or otherwise breached the walls of Central. They interviewed corrections officers and inmates to determine Horning's last actions inside. Doug Schuster first determined why Horning wasn't in his locked cell.
At any given time, not all inmates are locked in the cell. Some are out at work sites, some are working in the kitchen, some are working here and there. So you have a portion of your inmates that are supposed to be in their cells. Another portion would be accounted for via an out count sheet. Staff would visually see someone and say, these 4 inmates are in the kitchen working. So they wouldn't be in their cell during the count.
Investigators learned that Horning had been assigned a janitorial job, which included cleaning the infirmary. This gave him access to medical uniforms.
Well, he was able to obtain the white lab coat from the medical unit located inside the prison here. He was able to get a pair of white pants from the workers in the kitchen.
Investigators believed Horning exchanged his prison uniform for the lab coat, white pants, and a forged employee ID. They believed that he simply walked out of the prison and just a few miles into the town of Florence. Investigators looked over Horning's record to try and determine where he might go. One possible destination was California, where Horning had family and connections. The other was Winslow, Arizona, where Horning had vowed to get even with the cops and FBI agents who had sent him to prison. Special Agent Keith Tolhurst of the FBI's Phoenix Field Office joined the investigation.
Hey, are you going up there with him? Are you going to take dog teams up there?
He would work closely with the Department of Corrections to stop Horning before he struck again.
The information from the prison told us that they believed he was going to rob some more banks and then go to Winslow and try to kill either the Valley National Bank people that he robbed the bank from or kill the agents. So we believed he was going to head that direction.
The agent examined the items left in Horning's cell. They would be sent to profilers at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia.
We started getting involved with our behavioral science unit as well to see if they could profile this guy to find out whether he's the type of individual that would carry out his threats. And basically it came back later that it looked like he would be able, or at least capable, of carrying out those kind of threats.
If Horning was willing to kill FBI agents, no one was safe. The first solid lead in the hunt for Horning came 3 days after his escape. On May 15th, Pinal County Sheriff's deputies responded to a ranch house 15 miles west of the prison. The owner said the house had been burglarized. He said clothes, a pair of binoculars, and food were taken from his house. Also missing were several loaded guns. The FBI and local deputies believed it was Horning, stocking up for his bid to seek revenge. They were right.
And they found a fingerprint of his at the house to confirm that it was him that had done that. So now we're a little more concerned even that he was headed in the direction that he had said because he was starting to try to carry out his plan.
Good afternoon. We're holding this press conference.
The fugitive was now armed. The FBI turned to the media to warn the public and to solicit their help. At a news conference, agents released Horning's photo and information about his escape. Anyone spotting Horning was asked to call the FBI immediately, though they were instructed not to approach the suspected killer. The media coverage generated many leads. One came into the FBI from campers, claiming that Horning was stealing food, maps, and camping gear near Lake Mormon, about 170 miles north of the prison. Even though Horning knew how to hunt and fish, the burglaries were essential to his survival in the woods. Local officers followed his trail.
He'd break into cabins, he'd steal food, and then he'd move on. And what we ended up trying to do was a house-to-house search of all the cabins in the area. That was something that was going to be done by the local county sheriff offices, and they were searching as many houses as they could.
Horning was getting closer to the Grand Canyon National Park. The summer tourist season was beginning, which meant thousands of people would be in danger. They had to find him before anyone got hurt. Based on Horning's trail north, fugitive response teams from the Arizona Department of Corrections and Sheriff's Departments focused their search in Coconino County. It was an enormous undertaking. Coconino County consists of over 18,000 acres of woods and difficult terrain. Perfect cover for a fugitive.
We're in the mountains. It was Lake Mormon area. It was trees, mountains, rocks, hills, helicopters, massive amount of mobilization, radios, dogs, horses, trailers. It was just massive.
On June 3rd, 1992, a National Forest Service officer was patrolling a campground in Coconino County. The officer spotted Horning walking out of a wooded area. It was too dangerous for a lone officer to follow the armed killer into the forest.
Where he blew past the range.
When reinforcements arrived, Danny Ray Horning had disappeared once again. The deadly fugitive was still on the loose. In the summer of 1992, Danny Ray Horning escaped from prison in Florence, Arizona after serving only 9 months of 4 life sentences. The FBI believed the suspected killer was heading north towards Winslow, Arizona, to seek revenge on agents who had locked him away. On June 11th, agents responded to a report of a cabin burglary near the town of Pine, midway between the prison and Winslow. This time, Horning stole a truck and tried to establish himself as an outlaw celebrity, according to FBI Special Agent Keith Tolhurst.
More guns were stolen from there, and then that's where he left a note that said, you know, thank you for the items, Danny Ray, and trying to make his folk hero name known, I guess.
When the story hit the news, investigators worried the public might not realize how deadly Horning was. They knew he had likely dismembered a man in California. Now Horning had a vehicle, was armed, and was nearing the Grand Canyon National Park as tens of thousands of tourists were beginning their vacations. For 10 days, no new sightings came in. With the truck, he might have been hundreds of miles away already. Then, on June 21st, a Department of Public Safety officer spotted the stolen truck 50 miles north of Pine. Danny Ray Horning was driving. The officer called for backup. Before other officers could respond, Horning jumped from the truck, then fled on foot into the now familiar cover of the woods. FBI agents responded immediately. In the truck, they found another note signed by Horning.
It looks like you left in a hurry and left that.
Pine, Arizona is again up in the wooded area in northern Arizona, and it's along the path. If you're going from Florence up to Pine, he's almost to Winslow. So he's getting a lot closer to the area that we were concerned about. And again, we knew he had weapons. We knew he had the vehicle. He got up into that area, and it made us believe even more that he was going to try to carry out his threats.
Authorities in Winslow weren't the only ones in danger. The FBI established a field command post inside Grand Canyon National Park, where Horning was a threat to thousands of tourists. They tracked confirmed sightings, plotting out Horning's movements. Agents coordinated the response to each sighting and relayed information between the many law enforcement agencies involved. The territory being searched was vast, and Horning was moving quickly. On June 23rd, 2 tourists reported to agents that Horning had carjacked them inside the national park. The couple said they were in a parking lot the day before when Horning commandeered their car at gunpoint. He demanded that they drive him to the canyon's rim. He checked into a hotel room there and forced his captives inside.
Okay, you two. Quiet.
His gun prevented them from calling for help.
You understand me?
The couple feared he might shoot them at any moment.
I need you to release my brother.
Horning recorded a message for authorities.
And I need a guarantee.
He demanded that the search for him be called off. He also ordered the release of one of his brothers from prison and $1 million ransom for the release of a family that he planned to kidnap in exchange for the childless couple. The next day, Horning forced the couple to drive him to a store where he purchased camping gear, new clothing, and food. But before he found a family with children to kidnap, a Forest Service officer recognized him and began following the car.
No, let's go, move it!
Horning fired at the officer, causing him to slow down. He forced the driver to speed up.
Move it! Shut up! Let's go!
When he had gained some distance, Horning ordered the car stopped.
Thanks.
He jumped out and fled on foot. Since he shot at a law officer, it was clear Horning was becoming desperate and more dangerous.
We had information that he'd vowed not to be taken alive. He was on this vendetta against the FBI and Valley National Bank, and that he had already been in a shooting with the Forest Service. So we were very cautious as far as going in the woods, which we couldn't just go running after him as fast as he may have been running, which is one of the ways he got some advance time on us.
It was really scary. You should really catch
The kidnapped couple provided agents with information about Horning's new clothes and plan. Once again, armed search parties scoured the area where Horning was last seen, but found no trace of him. Horning was back on foot and hiding out somewhere in the immense Grand Canyon National Park. He had vowed to kidnap a family with children.
Come on, guys, let's go.
To stop him, the FBI brought in their elite hostage rescue team, known as the HRT. The HRT agents blanketed the area, rappelling into the canyon, checking caves and conducting aerial searches. They had to find the suspected killer before he had the chance to kill again. Search teams from the FBI, the Arizona Department of Corrections, and local sheriff's departments trailed fugitive Danny Ray Horning through Grand Canyon National Park. They mobilized dozens of officers, tracking dogs, and helicopters in the effort to find Horning before he kidnapped more hostages. But the accused killer could have been anywhere in the immense park's 1.2 million acres. Because of the danger Horning presented to tourists, the FBI decided to close the Grand Canyon National Park for the July 4th weekend. It was a major undertaking. The holiday is the park's busiest weekend of the year. It was also the first time in the park's 73-year history that it had been closed due to a criminal threat. But Horning was dangerous enough to warrant the extreme action, according to FBI Special Agent Keith Tolhurst.
He was moving around inside the canyon, and we couldn't control that because there was too many people in the canyon. So we were going to try to start getting everybody through the roadblocks and try to find him.
New visitors were turned away, and those already in the park were asked to leave. Police set up roadblocks at entry and exit points around the Grand Canyon. They searched vehicles and informed motorists of Horning. But they didn't stop him in time. On July 4th, 2 British tourists were preparing to leave the park when an armed man approached them. They knew it was Danny Ray Horning, though he no longer looked like the photos in news reports. He was much thinner, had blonde hair, and was clean-shaven. Since the park had been locked down, the women were Horning's only way out. At a roadblock, a ranger stopped the car and spoke to the three inside. Horning had threatened to kill the women if they tipped off anyone.
I know you guys all know each other.
The kidnapped women had to act calm as Horning sat with a gun trained on them. The officer didn't recognize the blonde-haired Horning and let them through. Once they were out of the park, he forced them to drive 60 miles south to Williams, Arizona. When they were far from the police in the Grand Canyon, Horning ordered them to stop the car. Brandishing his gun, he marched the terrified women into the cover of the woods. The women believed that Horning was taking them there to execute them. To their relief, he left them there, fleeing in their car. The women managed to free themselves and ran to a store. A clerk there called authorities and was told an officer was nearby. The women were badly shaken but unharmed.
Ladies, are you okay? For me.
They provided police with updated information about Horning, including his new look and his getaway vehicle.
We had put a description of the car out that the women had stolen from them, and a DPS officer spotted that car going from the Grand Canyon towards Phoenix.
Highway Patrolman Stephen Costello works for the Arizona Department of Safety. When Horning drove past, he began following the armed fugitive. It wasn't long before it became more than a car chase.
I hear a great big old bang, and I thought it was something wrong with the car. I looked at the gauges, all as well. At that particular time, I realized I'd been shot at, and I notified my dispatcher at that time that I'd been shot at, that I was all right, and I was going to follow him.
The gunfire forced the patrolman to keep his distance.
He's going to be taking the ramp at...
But he knew he couldn't lose Horning.
17.
The fugitive tried to make a getaway by turning off near the town of Sedona.
He takes the ramp, and I could see that he slammed on the brakes, and he skids in, and he has a slight accident is what he does. He hits a sign. I shouted out, you know, you better stop.
The shot missed. The officer had orders not to follow Horning into the woods. When backup arrived, agents and officers began a grid search of the area. Again, Horning couldn't be found. After nightfall, a lead was called in to the command post. A resident said he saw Horning drinking from a garden hose in a neighborhood near Sedona. A Border Patrol agent responded to the call. As far as anyone knew, Horning was still armed. This time, there was no shootout. After being relentlessly pursued for 54 days and over hundreds of miles, an exhausted Horning simply gave up.
No doubt in my mind that because of the efforts of the teams that had been chasing him, that they had basically run him into the ground. He was laying there, dog-tired, with his tongue hanging out, and for a man who still had his weapon on him and vowed not to be taken alive, all he wanted was a glass of water.
Danny Ray Horning earned 6 more years for his actions during his violent flight.
Mr. Danny Horning?
Authorities in California decided to extradite Horning and charge him with the murder of Sam McCullough. His trial began on May 12, 1994. Prosecuting attorneys proved that in September of 1990, Danny Horning broke into Sam McCullough's house to rob him. Horning was angry that McCullough had pressed charges after an earlier robbery. He bound McCullough, rendering him helpless. Horning was using his sawed-off .22 caliber Western field rifle, the same one witnesses had seen him kill a dog with earlier. At point-blank range, Horning fired 1 shot at Sam McCullough. Minute blood spatter, as well as the human tissue found in the drain, indicated Horning had likely dismembered the victim in his tub. Then he dumped the body parts into the Burns Cut River. On July 15, 1994, about 4 years after the death of Sam McCullough, a California jury found Horning guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death. Danny Ray Horning was sent to San Quentin Prison. He remains locked down in the maximum security of death row.